So, thank you for joining me today. I wanted to give you a little introduction to my background. Yes, it's real. I talk a lot about getting out of your patterns of behavior and taking some moderate risks, perhaps. I haven't said that outright, but really that's what it means, because getting outside of your patterns feels risky. I'm always enamored by people that travel a lot. Their world experience is so different than those of us with our feet planted firmly on the ground. But I want to have the experience of seeing and understanding other cultures and my place and our place as Americans in the world at large. And I am having that experience. My husband and I decided to go visit some old friends who live in Australia. Hi, old friends. And in doing so, we entered another world, another earth, another society, another way of thinking, seeing, but also a new expression of ourselves. In the last 2 chapters, we explored Visionary, Graham Hancock's groundbreaking book, in which he examines the striking commonalities between altered state experiences across cultures and time periods. He draws connections between the visions of ancient shamans, the encounters of UFO abductees, spontaneous trance states, the journeys of modern psychonauts, and the fairy lore of Ireland and the British Isles before the 1900s. While those experiences may seem unrelated at first glance, Hancock argues that they are fundamentally the same, filtered through the cultural lenses of their respective eras. Using first-hand accounts, archaeological evidence like the painted caves of Europe, and his own experiences with entheogens, he weaves a compelling tapestry to support his thesis. And I have to say, his findings are fascinating. Now, let's pull on a few more threads in this tapestry. Threads that, if tugged just so, might unravel our very perception of reality. But don't be alarmed. This is a good thing. One of my goals is to encourage you to think beyond your confines, the confines of your current worldview, to notice the hidden connections, or if you will, the interwoven threads. What we're about to explore may seem like a leap, but Hancock's arguments force us to confront the fact that science has not answered all the questions, and far from it. Perhaps by considering new ideas, we can take a collective step forward in our own evolution, both as individuals and as a species. At the end of the last chapter, I shared the Roper survey questions, which researchers use to estimate the prevalence of the alien abduction phenomenon. Specifically, they aim to determine how many people may have had an abduction experience without even realizing it. How many of you answered yes to at least 4 of the 5 target questions? If you did, I'd love to hear from you. If you don't want to know what I'm talking about, go back and listen to the past episodes. According to analysis by John E. Mack, PhD, roughly 1 in 50 Americans has had an abduction experience. That's crazy. But what does that actually mean? As we discussed, Hancock suggests that many self-identified abductees are what he calls spontaneous trancers. Unlike shamans who use rituals or substances to enter altered states, spontaneous trancers fall into them naturally, often while sleeping. This, he argues, explains why abductees frequently report being taken through walls or floating into spaceships for surgical procedures. If you've ever had an out-of-body experience, you know that it can feel completely real. So real that it defies logic. And our focus today is going to be on spontaneous trancing. Some researchers believe that all humans have the latent ability to enter these states, with endogenous DMT playing a crucial role. But why do only some people experience them spontaneously? Rick Strassman, PhD, proposes that certain individuals naturally produce higher levels of DMT than others. The good news, there are ways to activate this ability through breathwork, trance dance, or psychedelics, allowing us to tune our internal frequency like a radio dial. Returning to the painted caves of Europe, Hancock suggests that the therianthropes, those half-human, half-animal figures, represent supernatural beings encountered in altered states. These shape-shifting entities appear differently to different people, molded by cultural expectations. Because they are non-physical, their form is fluid, interpreted through the lens of the viewer. Hancock even suggests that these entities have played a guiding role in the human evolution, with the shaman serving as the interpreter of those messages. That's pretty cool. This brings us to an even bigger question. Could these beings reside in another dimension? That'd fit in, I think. Quantum physics is making it harder and harder to dismiss this possibility. If we accept the premise that multiple dimensions exist, is it really so far-fetched to think that altering our state of consciousness might allow us to access them? Hancock suggests that these entities want to interact with us, and that perhaps they have been doing so for millennia. Some theories even propose that they seek to merge with us genetically to level up both of our species. One of Hancock's most intriguing arguments centers around entoptic phenomena. These are the geometric patterns often seen in altered states. He believes that some of these symbols are associated with snakes, particularly twin snakes. Many who take ayahuasca report visions of serpents, coils, and double-helix shapes, all of which bear a striking resemblance to something else, our DNA. And this is where things get really interesting. DNA is a double-helix polymeric structure, an infinitely replicable information storage system. It codes for the synthesis of all proteins necessary for life. Every living thing on Earth, plants, animals, humans, share the same 4 nucleotides: adenine, cytosine, guanine, and thymine. These nucleotides pair up in the same way every single time. Adenine always pairs with thymine and cytosine with guanine, forming the rungs of the DNA ladder. This system is not only precise, but has remained unchanged since the very dawn of life. But there's something that should make you pause. Only 3% of our DNA actively codes for those proteins. That means a staggering 97% of our DNA is classified as junk DNA, sequences that do not appear to have a known function. Why would nature preserve and replicate so much useless information in every cell of every living organism? Why would evolution go to such great lengths to carry forward sequences that serve no purpose? Hancock argues that this so-called junk is anything but junk. It may be dormant, unused for now, but what if it holds the key to something greater? And then there's the elephant in the room. Where did DNA come from in the first place? Materialist science would have us believe that this incredibly complex system arose by chance. But Hancock points out that the probability of DNA forming randomly is 1 in 10 to the 260th power. That's essentially impossible. There's no evidence of life existing before 3.5 billion years ago. So did this intricate system truly evolve in such a short span of time? Even Francis Crick, co-discoverer of DNA structure, found this hard to believe. And here's one more thought to leave you with. Why does DNA look like two entwined serpents coiling around each other in opposite directions? Throughout history, twin snakes have appeared as symbols of wisdom, healing, and transformation, from the caduceus to the Ouroboros. Could these ancient symbols be pointing us towards something we've long forgotten? Could they be clues left behind, embedded within us, waiting to be decoded? Hancock suggests that by examining the patterns in this so-called junk DNA, we may discover its true purpose. If he's right, unlocking its secrets could redefine what it means to be human. And that is where we're headed next. There's this concept called Zipf's law, Zipf''S, developed in the 1930s through word frequency analysis. Researchers discovered that the more often a word appears in a text, the more important it is within its context. By applying Zipf's law to 600,000 books, they found that, without exception, word frequency correlated with significance. Sound familiar? That's because we've all become experts in Zipf's law, whether we realize it or not. Keywords, hashtags, SEO, it all hinges on this principle. So why does this matter here? In the 1990s at Boston University, they applied Zipf's law to 37 DNA sequences, some short, some long, some coding, some non-coding. But what was found was startling. The coding sections of DNA did not follow Zipf's law, but the so-called junk DNA did. This suggests that non-coding DNA, that which doesn't code for proteins, was structured, organized, like a language. These sequences may not code for proteins, but they may, in fact, carry a message, one we just haven't been able to decipher yet. A second test analyzed redundancy in DNA. The results? The coding sections were random, but the non-coding sections were redundant. 10 years later, when Graham Hancock asked Dr. Stanley, the person in charge of that testing, if he still believed non-coding DNA was a language, and he emphatically said yes. Which raises the obvious question. If this is a language, who is the author? And what is the message? The message is, the world has beauty, is full of beauty. Now, I hate to chase a rabbit here, but this is where things get really interesting. Right after reading Visionary, I grabbed a book Hancock referenced more than once called The Cosmic Serpent by Jeremy Narby. And let me tell you, it was good. Narby argues that the twin snake form of DNA has been known to indigenous cultures for thousands of years, long before Crick and Watson. He suggests that shamans, through ayahuasca rituals, have been accessing direct knowledge of DNA, not through lab work, but through visions. He describes drinking ayahuasca in the Peruvian Amazon and seeing two giant serpents that communicated with him in this vision. The vision isn't unique. It's actually the most common ayahuasca hallucination. And across cultures like Amazonia, Egypt, India, Greece, Scandinavia, the cosmic serpent appears as the creator of life. Narby proposes that DNA itself may be the source of shamanic knowledge, that by entering altered states, shamans interact with it. He points out that indigenous healers possess astonishingly advanced botanical and medical knowledge, which, according to them, comes directly from the plant teachers themselves. Hallucinogens that imprint knowledge onto their minds. But Narby is not the only one making these connections. Let's look at a few key figures who've had psychedelic experiences that shaped their views on DNA and life's origins. Narby. While on ayahuasca, he saw two boa constrictors that spoke to him, telling him that humans carry a control system for the species, one that is not originally from Earth. Each of us has an inner serpent that can communicate with us if we listen. Michael Harner, an anthropologist, said, on ayahuasca, he saw two dragons descending to Earth, fleeing from something. They showed him that they created life here to hide within it. They exist in all living things, and they speak to us internally. Makes me think of some fairy tales. I'm going to have to think about that. Francis Crick, co-discoverer of DNA, said, here's where things get really weird. Crick was reportedly on LSD when he visualized the double-helix structure of DNA. This is a rumor. Despite his standing in the scientific community, he was a known admirer of Aldous Huxley and a frequent microdoser of LSD, which was legal at the time. He credited his eureka moment, seeing DNA structure, to his LSD experiences. But it gets even wilder. Crick later proposed the theory of directed panspermia, the idea that life on Earth is too complex to have evolved naturally in just 3.5 billion years. Instead, he speculated that life was seeded here by an advanced extraterrestrial civilization. Wow. He outlined this theory in his book, Life Itself, Its Origin and Nature, admitting that while speculative, it could explain how life survived Earth's early hostile conditions. Now let's take a step back. If Crick was right and life was seeded here, if Narby was right and DNA carries an encoded message, and if shamans really are accessing hidden knowledge directly from DNA, then what exactly is trying to reach us and why? Are these serpents, these cosmic teachers, actually showing themselves to us again? And if Harner's dragons were spaceships rather than mythical beings, does that mean our origins are even stranger than we've imagined? And I'm going to add, was Zecharia Sitchin actually right? But that's a rabbit hole for another whole day. But oh my God, if you know, you know. Think about it. I know. This is weird, but don't judge just yet. Let your mind play with these ideas. It's okay. Nobody's going to come slap your hand for it. Give your default mode network a little distraction. Stop thinking about politics. Think about DNA. Because this is just the beginning. We have a lot more to talk about. For instance, why am I in Tasmania? Why am I sitting on a beach in Tasmania? This raises an even deeper question, though. Do different altered states of consciousness correspond to different religious experiences? These are my questions. And if so, could we then consider the structure of religious denominations as a taxonomy of mystical experiences? Just as different psychedelics produce distinct visionary landscapes, could it be that the rituals, prayers, and meditative techniques of each religious tradition generate unique neurological and spiritual states? I can't be the first person to think about this. I wonder how many clergy have had an actual religious experience. How many who have chosen to be baptized have had an actual religious experience? And how do we prove either one? Or is it even necessary to do that? Let's take the Pentecostal experience, for instance. Speaking in tongues is a gift supposedly given by the experience itself and could be considered proof of that experience, I suppose. Contrast that with the Catholic mystic tradition, where saints like Teresa of Avila describe states of profound stillness, visions, and even levitation. Or the Buddhist experience, where deep meditation leads to non-dual awareness, a dissolution of self rather than encounter with the divine other. What if these traditions are at their core variations on a single human potential, our ability to tap into higher states of consciousness? But each is constrained by the metaphors and dogmas of its own system. If that's the case, then religion is both a doorway and a cage, as I've mentioned before, a tool for accessing the divine, yet also a set of boundaries that dictate how one is allowed to experience it. And this raises another crucial point. What happens to those who step outside of these sanctioned methods? Does that make those methods fundamentally evil? Oh, I don't think so. However, I can see how the church would aim to guide its members towards the sanctioned way to access their divinity for their safety. But does that give man way too much credit? For the clergy are still only humans, subject to all of humanity's faults. But we know from history that mystical experiences, when they don't align with church doctrine, are often treated as heretical. The Inquisition, witch hunts, even the excommunication of Christian mystics, these are all cases of institutions suppressing direct, unmediated access to the divine. And that suppression continues today. The modern church rarely teaches us how to have an experience with God. It teaches how to believe in one and how to behave. Yet belief without experience is fragile. It's secondhand knowledge, easily shaken. No wonder so many people turn away from religion while still searching for something more. But this brings me to my final question. If religion has historically been both a guardian and a gatekeeper of mystical experience, where does that leave us? If the goal is direct contact with the divine, is the church an obstacle or a potential catalyst? Could religious rituals, mass, prayer, fasting, song, be repurposed as tools for altered states in the same way that shamanic ceremonies use drumming, plant medicine, and breathwork? If so, then perhaps the real issue isn't religion itself, but its stagnation, the loss of its living, experiential core. Because in the end, what matters isn't the doctrine. It isn't the hierarchy or the tradition. It's whether or not you've touched something beyond yourself. Whether you've stepped into that unknown space where the mystical, the numinous, the divine becomes real. Not because someone told you it was, but because you've been there. What is the church afraid of? And if you haven't, if you've only ever been told about God, then maybe it's time to stop believing and start seeking. My trance experience at church. Okay, I'm just going to go into this very briefly. I did have a moment growing up in the Lutheran church. One Sunday, I was up in the balcony, as I usually was because my parents were in the choir. Suddenly, the ceiling appeared to open up and a bright light bathed the congregation below. It was gorgeous. It was clear as day, but lasted only about 30 seconds. I felt an immense sense of love and acceptance, and not to be trite, but a knowing. It validated God's presence for me. However, I have been disenchanted by man's ultimate sin to stand between God and the people's birthright to experience its unmediated presence firsthand. Let's take a moment to consider the difference between prayer and meditation. In prayer, we seem to be doing the ones speaking, projecting our thoughts, desires, and gratitude outward. In meditation, we listen, turning inward to receive, to be still. I think both are valuable because any true relationship is a dialogue, not a monologue. However, I would argue that it's through meditation that we come closest to experiencing oneness with Source, with God. Think about it. When we pray, we're directing our words outward toward an external God. This implies separation, as if Source is somewhere out there. But in meditation, we turn inward and recognize that if we are created from God, in God's likeness, then Source isn't separate from us. By shedding our attachment to the material form itself, our bodies, meditation allows us to connect with God as an inherent part of our own being. It's not about reaching outward, but about dissolving this illusion of separation and meeting that Source within us. Here's a few more questions and food for thought. If you have had a religious experience, does a divine experience, you know what I'm talking about, does that make you a spontaneous trancer? I think so, yes. Using Graham Hancock's framework, someone who has had a profound religious experience could be seen as a spontaneous trancer. Hancock suggests that altered states of consciousness, whether induced through psychedelics, rhythmic practices, fasting, or even spontaneously, can open the mind to deeper realities for those who can't do it spontaneously. In this context, a spontaneous religious experience, like a sudden vision, light coming down onto the congregation, mystical insight, or overwhelming sense of unity with the divine, could be interpreted as an unplanned trance state. The person didn't consciously seek to alter that state, but through intense emotion, prayer, or even a moment of stillness, their consciousness shifted. Hancock argues that these states can reveal dimensions of reality that are typically hidden in ordinary consciousness, aligning with historical accounts of prophets, mystics, or spiritual figures who describe encounters with the divine or otherworldly. So yes, from Hancock's perspective, spontaneous religious experiences could very well be moments where the individual inadvertently tapped into a deeper trance-like awareness. Number 2, is voluntary baptism meant to identify the spontaneous trancers in the congregation? That's an intriguing perspective. If we follow this line of thought, voluntary baptism could be seen as a ritual designed to both induce and identify those who are more susceptible to spontaneous trance states, or, in spiritual terms, those more open to profound religious experiences. Baptism is often described as a symbolic death and rebirth, a surrender of the old self and an emergence into a new spiritual identity. The emotional intensity combined with the symbolic immersion or anointing could naturally create the conditions for an altered state of consciousness. For some, this moment might trigger a deep, spontaneous connection with the divine, what Hancock might describe as a spontaneous trance. In that sense, voluntary baptism could serve as both a spiritual initiation and a kind of test. Those who emerge from the experience reporting intense visions, feelings of unity, or a powerful sense of transformation might be seen as having a deeper innate connection to the spiritual realm. Spontaneous trancers, in a way. Others might not have such experiences, but the ritual still marks their commitment. It's also worth considering that in many traditions, baptism is a public declaration of inner transformation. The congregation witnesses who is truly moved by the Spirit, which could subtly identify those more attuned to altered states of consciousness. Number 3. Did the church at one time mean to create a priesthood of spontaneous trancers that would, in essence, spread the word of that denomination as shamans? Number 4. Or was the church always just solely interested in hijacking spirituality and thereby controlling it? I think these are good questions to ask when you're considering your spiritual journey. I'm not sure Hancock is giving the church its fair credit, nor is he really giving it the appropriate shakedown. It's a touchy subject for sure, but like I said before, I grew up in a church that encouraged asking questions, so here I am, asking away. I do believe some clergy have had ecstatic experience labeled as seeing God. Okay, that's it for today, but I'm going to leave you with some closing thoughts. This isn't the last we will hear about these topics, but there is just so much more I want to cover. It will have to be done another day. Was Christ actually a shaman? A shaman is a healer, and they were often pierced and then resurrected, left for dead in a cave, emerged as a spirit guide, saving souls, and was a wounded man speaking to God. Okay, sidebar. Origins of the word sham. I guess we will never know, but think about it. It could have been a derogatory word alluding to the unseen, that which could not be proven, but was also not of God or Christ. And it would have been thought of as a sham or shameful for the Inquisition, by the Inquisition. Medicine man, perhaps? Sham? I didn't find any etymological tie of sham to shaman, but when I looked up shame, the Oxford Dictionary said it was of German origin and was spelled sham, S-C-H-A-M, or shaman, in Dutch shaman, in Old English shamu or shamian. Oh, Lordy, that's a rabbit hole for another day, like I said. Okay, so a little bit about the Gnostics, because I've heard this word over and over and didn't really know what it meant. Salvation is revealed by knowledge. Illusion is where the soul is trapped. This makes me think of Jung and the psyche, but also Bernardo, Hoffman, and idealism. Is the psyche actually the trapped soul? And is the psyche actually an entity being expressed by the language in our DNA? Oh my God, this is so much to fathom, but could it be the psyche communicating with entities while in an altered state? And that leads me to the thought of mitochondria. We know they weren't always part of our cellular structure, but where did they come from? More importantly, we know they contribute information in the form of DNA. In fact, it's through our mitochondrial DNA that we can trace our maternal genes. And oddly, our teeth carry accessible quantities of that genetic material even after death. Okay, Hermetics. They also believe everything is an illusion. Reality cannot be seen. That which ever is the only thing that is truly real. Man is just how we appear. Hermetics and Gnostics were pressed by the emerging Catholic Church as they enacted the idea of blind faith, which was one giant step away from experiential knowing and personal revelation. The Catholic Church wanted to be the exclusive channel to control salvation. A layperson could not own books of the Bible and were not allowed to translate it, even if they were able to read. Santa Claus is a shamanic survival in the annals of history. He was an ancient shaman among the reindeer cults. Red and white mushrooms were consumed to induce visions in winter. Around the same time of year, we celebrate Christmas. In the festivals, a shaman would be seen coming down through the hole in a yurt ceiling, do the ceremony, then leave. Shamans fly, Santa flies, reindeer fly. It's all about the journey. Other saints that went through shamanic journeys that included being pierced by arrows. Saint Sebastian was pierced by arrows. Saint Ursula, pierced by arrows. Saint Justina, breast pierced by swords. Saint Stanislaus, bishop who was dismembered. Saint Teresa of Avila saw an angel that pierced her heart with a spear. And of course, Christ, pierced by nails and a crown of thorns. The church always absorbed pre-existing belief structures, shamanic rituals, and tried to integrate them into Christianity so that people would assimilate, but not until after trying to repress them. Joan of Arc was an example of this. 5 centuries after her death, she was canonized. What role do you think the church plays on this topic of spontaneous trance and access to altered states of reality? Well, that's it for the planned episode today, folks. I consider myself to be Generation Jones, and if you don't know what that is, it's people that were born between 1954 and 1965 it's a cusp generation, and we don't see the world through the eyes of the boomers or through Gen X, but sort of as a blend of both. But what I do know is I was raised during the thickest part of the Cold War. Like I was taught in elementary school about getting under your desk in the event of a bomb scare. Like not a bomb scare from some deranged person down the street, but from Russia or China or whatever. How to roll in the grass to get the flames off of yourself, how to get in the hallway and crouch down. I mean, it was real. I'm not sure any of us really felt the fear, but we went through the motions of what the school and our parents were telling us and how to prepare for an attack from another country. That's so weird to me now, but the reality is returning. I mean, I don't think it has to be. But being outside of our country's borders right now, I get to see what other people who are so similar to us are thinking, saying, doing, how their government works, what's working for them, what isn't working for them, how our government affects them. These are all so important to our own personal development. Each and every one of us, I think, has a responsibility to experience this. If you don't, you will never know how the United States compares to anyone else. And maybe you don't care, but you should care, because we are all humans. We're all God's creatures. Every single one of us has God right here. And I don't know. It's been enlightening. It doesn't ease my concerns one bit. In fact, if anything, I'm even more concerned. But it's clear to me that as a country, we need to have an attitude adjustment. That's all there is to it. We're like the teenager in the group, thinking we know it all, and we clearly don't. But it also makes me think of that whole concept of Wetiko. If one person or one country leaves the group, and we'll just use NATO as an example, thinking they can survive on their own, not only are we not likely to survive as a country with that attitude, but we will bring the demise of the whole. And I don't mean just NATO, I mean all of us. And if you don't know what Wetiko is, go back and listen to my episodes on Wetiko. It is a very compelling way to look at our modern day crisis, which isn't really all that modern. Okay, so back to this right here. This is called Great Oyster Bay. That is Freycinet National Park. And this is a dune on 9 Mile Beach in Tasmania. So we decided to, while we're in Australia, take a little time out, have some self-reflection. I wanted to record somewhere different. We're staying in a fabulous Airbnb that I'll probably attach some videos or short videos or photos at the end of this, just my little travelogue. If you're thinking about traveling somewhere, I highly recommend Australia. It's been awesome. Anyway, thanks for joining me today. This right here, this is without makeup and all unnatural, but I'm sitting here in a kimono and thriving. So love you guys, and I will post again just as soon as I can. It's quite a process to actually do this internationally, trying to deal with upload speeds and internet access and things. So anyway, I'll talk to you soon. Take care of yourselves and get out there and try something new. All right, bye.
I'm getting outside of my box here. I mean, I grew up going to the beach in Galveston, but it's nothing like this. And traveling all the way around the world has been an adventure, and I'm so proud of myself. I'm so proud of us for doing it. I want to encourage all of you to try it. It's life-changing. Save up all your pennies. Actually, the exchange rate in Australia and New Zealand is extremely good right now, so. Oh my God. Lots of ocean meditation time happening soon. We thought that sound was thunder. Out that way is Antarctica. Cheers.